3 years. That's how long Apple TV made us wait. No trailer, no teaser, not even a confirmation that anyone at that company remembered this show existed. Then, out of nowhere, a tweet. For words. Ted Lasso returns this summer. And the internet lost its mind. Here's the thing nobody's talking about, though. This isn't just a show coming back from a nice long nap. This is a franchise trying to pull off one of the hardest moves in television. Ending a story that already felt finished, and then convincing you it needed to keep going anyway. So today we're breaking down Ted Lasso Season 4. Not just what happens in it, but why Apple made this bet, what the critics are actually fighting about behind the scenes, and something most reviews are completely missing. This season is quietly ripped straight out of a real headline in women's sports. Stick around, because that last part changes how you should watch this whole season. Let's rewind. Ted Lasso premiered in 2020, right in the middle of a global lockdown, and it did something television almost never does anymore. It made being kind look cool. A mustached American football coach gets hired to run a British soccer club he knows nothing about, and instead of failing spectacularly, he wins people over with biscuits, dad jokes, and an almost suspicious amount of emotional intelligence. Season 1 was a phenomenon. Season 2 doubled down, and somehow got even more acclaimed. And then Season 3 happened. Season 3 is widely considered the weakest chapter of the whole run. Episodes stretched past an hour, the jokes started taking a back seat to speeches, and by the finale, Ted packs up, says goodbye to AFC Richmond, and flies home to Kansas to be a full-time dad. It read like a series finale because it was built like one. Rebecca gets a hint at building a women's team. Roy takes over as head coach. Beard stays behind and gets married. Curtain closes. Everybody assumed that was it. Except it wasn't. It took almost 2 full years after that finale for Apple to officially confirm a 4th season was actually happening. And when you sit with that gap, it tells you something. This wasn't a show getting rushed back for a quick cash grab. Ted Lasso has been one of the most consistently streamed shows on Apple TV for years, reportedly spending well over 800 days on the US top 10 list, longer than anything else on the platform. Apple didn't need new content. They needed their flagship show back. So the real question going into Season 4 wasn't, will people watch? Of course they would. The real question was whether the show could justify existing after already saying its goodbyes. That here's where it gets interesting from a writing standpoint, and this is the part a lot of casual viewers are going to miss. Once Ted got comfortable at Richmond, the show lost its original engine. The whole fish out of water premise only works when the fish doesn't know how to swim yet. By Season 3, Ted understood the sport, understood the culture, understood the club. There was nowhere left for that specific joke to go. So instead of forcing another year of will Richmond win the big game, the writers did something smarter. They handed the keys to a brand new team. AFC Richmond's Lady Greyhounds, a second-division women's football club that Rebecca and Keely are building essentially from scratch. New coaching staff, new players, new locker room politics, and a returning Ted who isn't the story's main engine this time around. He's more of a supporting force helping other people find their footing. That's actually a clever move, because it resets the clock without pretending the last 3 seasons didn't happen. Everyone you already love is still there. Rebecca, Keely, Roy, Higgins, Beard, they're all present and accounted for. But the plot itself gets a completely blank page. It's less of a Season 4 and more of a spin-off wearing a familiar jersey. And based on what's aired so far, that swap from men's football to women's football isn't just a background detail. It's the entire thematic spine of the season. Okay, here's the section I actually wanted to make this video for, because almost nobody covering this show is connecting the dots on this. Ted Lasso Season 4 centers on a fictional second-division women's team fighting for legitimacy, fighting for funding, and fighting against a fan base that isn't sure it wants them around. That plotline sounds like classic sports drama fiction, except it's basically describing what's happening in actual English football right now in real time this year. For context, English women's football only became fully independent from the National Football Association back in 2024, when the top 2 tiers were spun off into their own separate governing body. That's shockingly recent. And this year, that governing body approved something huge. The top flight, the Women's Super League, is expanding from 12 clubs to 14 starting in the 2026-27 season, specifically to create more movement between the top division and the second division below it, which is now branded WSL2. They even added a promotion and relegation playoff between the two tiers, specifically to build the kind of stakes and drama that keeps casual fans watching. And the money behind this is not small. Deloitte's financial reporting shows commercial revenue across women's Super League clubs jumped over 50% in a single year. Separate industry analysis is projecting women's sport as a whole to cross $3 billion in revenue this year, with football accounting for more than a third of that number. UEFA has committed close to €1 billion toward growing the women's game across Europe over the next 6 years, specifically aiming for 6 fully professional leagues and thousands of professional female players continent-wide. When Ted Lasso Season 4 shows Rebecca and Keeley being warned that a second-division women's club could be a financial disaster, or shows part of the existing fan base pushing back against the new team. That's not the writers inventing conflict out of thin air. That's a fictionalized version of a conversation the entire sport is having right now, in boardrooms and stadiums across England. The show picked genuinely the most current, most relevant real-world storyline in football to build its comeback season around. Whether that was intentional timing or a lucky coincidence, it makes the Lady Greyhounds feel less like a sitcom subplot and more like a show quietly documenting a cultural shift while it's still happening down on the cast side. The returns are mostly what you'd expect. Jason Sudeikis is back as Ted, and he's also executive producing again. Hannah Waddingham returns as Rebecca, Juno Temple as Keeley, Brett Goldstein as Roy Kent, Brendan Hunt as Coach Beard, and Jeremy Swift as Higgins. That's basically the entire original core intact, which honestly wasn't guaranteed given how final that Season 3 ending felt. New additions are where it gets fun. Tanya Reynolds joins as Alice Chilton, a member of the Lady Greyhounds coaching staff whose personality is essentially the polar opposite of Ted's, which sets up an interesting dynamic right out of the gate. There's also a new actor stepping into the role of Ted's son Henry, now old enough to actually be a character in the story rather than just a name mentioned on a phone call. And in a nice bit of behind-the-scenes trivia, one of the new players joining the roster is played by the real-life sister of the actor who portrays Danny Rojas, and she's reportedly an actual professional soccer player in real life, which is a fun bit of casting authenticity for a show about football. One more thing worth mentioning respectfully. The show also lost a member of its extended cast during the gap between seasons. Anthony Stewart Head, who played Rupert Mannion, passed away before this season's release. Longtime fans will likely recognize his work well beyond Ted Lasso 2. It's a reminder of just how much real time passed between Season 3 and this comeback. Now let's talk reception, because this is genuinely one of the more divided critical responses in recent memory. When the review embargo lifted, the aggregate critic score actually moved around within the same day, at one point sitting in the high 80s, then dipping into the mid-70s, before settling back up near 90% based on dozens of reviews. For comparison, Season 1 debuted in the low 90s, Season 2 nearly hit a perfect score, and Season 3, the widely disliked one, still landed in the low 80s. So even the comeback season is putting up numbers roughly in line with the season everyone considered a disappointment. The actual opinions are split into two camps. One side is calling this a genuine return to form, praising the show for recapturing the warmth and comfort that made it a hit in the first place, with more than one critic describing the experience in terms of nostalgia and emotional relief. The other side is far less convinced, with at least one major outlet arguing the season still hasn't figured out what its purpose is, criticizing the opening episode specifically for spending too much time on Ted's life back in America instead of getting into the actual football and team building the show is known for. The most common critique across both camps, positive and negative, is that Season 4 plays things extremely safe. It leans hard on familiar character dynamics, especially the ongoing will-they-won't-they between Roy and Keeley, rather than pushing the story into genuinely new territory. So depending who you ask, this is either exactly the comfort food television everyone's been craving for 3 years, or it's a show that's coasting on goodwill instead of taking real risks that here's where I land on it. Ted Lasso Season 4 isn't trying to reinvent itself, and honestly, maybe it shouldn't. What it's doing instead is quietly attaching itself to one of the most legitimately interesting storylines in sports right now, the fight for real investment and respect in women's football, and wrapping it in a cast everybody already loves. That's a smart bet, even if the execution is a little uneven in these first episodes. Season 4 is rolling out weekly, 10 episodes total, running through early October, and there are already signs Apple is planning to treat this as the start of a longer run rather than a one-off revival. So if the first half felt like a warm-up, there's still plenty of runway left for this new era to prove itself. That's my breakdown. If you think the critics who loved it are right, or if you're firmly into this show should have stayed retired camp, drop that in the comments. I actually want to see how split this audience is. And if you want more breakdowns like this the moment a show drops, you know what to do. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.